Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the second session of 5 Attributes of High Performance Team with John Mannion and myself, Ralph Rajs. John, good to have you back. Good to see you on the screen.
Thanks, Ralph. Good to be back. Definitely looking forward to another discussion, and there's very important ideas we're going to cover.
Yeah, so John and I have been together. We've known each other over 30 years, lifelong friends, neighbors, grew up with our kids together, churchgoers, sports activities. So we've got a whole mesh of life experience that we've had together. And so, yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to bring to the point of our careers now, John, where we've been doing so many things in different spaces to be able to come together and do it together.
No, I'd for sure agree. And I think that, Ralph, again, mentioned we were neighbors for so long that, we were both kind of, I was more in the teaching and coaching field and Ralph in the fitness world. But throughout all that, our friendship and just got stronger and stronger to the point where when we moved to Oregon, our family did in 2010, Ralph was the first one to come to one of my games in Oregon when he was up here. And so a lot of the things that we talk about, that we're even going to talk about tonight are things that we've sort of lived, kind of growing up side by side in over the last 30 some years. So it's kind of, that gives a real, gives me some excitement as far as we're speaking about something that we really both have kind of experienced together.
Yeah. Now John's humble, but he won't tell you that he's doing keynote speaking, working with coaches, was one of the 5 finalists for High School Coach of the Year last year, which is a huge honor. So well-decorated coach and very well respected in that world. So he's doing keynote speaking now. I'm working with the table group. We're doing sessions for managers and their teams to help them be more high performance. So we're working in, really trying to contribute back to the people and share all the things that we've learned. All right, so let's get into it, John. So last time we spent a lot of time talking about smart teams versus healthy teams, right? So smart teams are the teams where they do the technical things well. Healthy teams are teams where they really come together and they work together and they really multiply their ability that they have on the smart side because they're healthy and they avoid things like internal conflict and siloed working and those types of things. So we're going to delve into that a little bit more and give people an idea how you create a high performance team. And the first step to that is building trust, right? So we're on the base of the pyramid. Pat Lencioni's book, The Advantage, is where all this material comes from. So let's talk about trust. John, I know you've spent a lot of time working with your kids and your teams and your coaches building trust.
Yeah, Ralph, and I think really, as you mentioned with a healthy team, I think teamwork is something that when you have a good, strong team, there's nothing like it. And I think that having, an understanding of what make up a lot of these components is certainly critical to kind of understanding, how to get the team where you want it to be. And the first, the bottom of the pyramid there is, what our topic for today is being trust. I think in my career as a high school football coach over many years, like one of the beauties of team sports, and I'm biased toward football maybe, is that it really requires all 11 people on the field at a time to trust that the other person's gonna do their role. And I'm sure like a business or a managerial team, some roles can be more glamorous than others. Some roles are more behind the scenes, yet equally as critical and important to the success of the operation. So I really believe that, making that a point of emphasis that everybody on your team is important, I think is a real step toward building trust. And I think that for me as a coach, we would play our games on Friday nights, and win or lose, we would always meet the next morning at our team at 8:30 and we'd work out, and then we'd watch the game film from the night before. And I always was very purposeful about, when a touchdown is scored, certainly that person that scored the touchdown, gets recognition. But I also made a point of really trying to emphasize what the others did to make that touchdown possible. And I think as we get into this discussion of trust, I think, that's something that having people feel valued and having their value recognized, I think is an important first step along the way.
Yeah, no, great. Very well said, John. So let's talk about the concept of teams versus work groups. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is when we're talking about teams, we're talking about people that are able to come together for a common goal, right? And in business, it could be, it could be a revenue target, it could be a member acquisition, it could be net income, it could be a stock price, it could be many, many things. Just like, and what's great about sports is that the scoreboard is singular, right? It's visible. Everybody always sees it. So we try to use that analogy in business of what is the scoreboard that everybody on the team is focused on. And when we have great working teams, that's easy and everybody pulls together. Now, talking about what work groups are a collection of people that are working sort of within their own agenda, their own silo, right? So in the sports world, we'd compare maybe a track team versus a football team, like you said, John, where an individual performance contributes to the overall goal, but it's really about their individual performance. So what we're really trying to avoid in the work environment is this idea of work groups where people are only focused on their individual teams and their individual goals and not the collective of the entire company. So one of the hallmarks of that we'd see, and I would want to get your comment on this, is people that are willing to sacrifice, right? When people are willing to sacrifice for the greater good, either their time or their budget or their experience, right? They're able to give up something for the others, then you're part of a team and not part of a work group.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think that, the beginning of this to me is within any team or work group is I believe it really starts with relationships. And a big piece of building this process is having people that actually authentically get to know one another. And, I think that I know in the context of a workday or in context of a practice, this can be challenging, but I always felt that making connections with all my players, with my coaches daily in a manner that they know that I care about them and that I know something about them that I wouldn't otherwise know that helps me better lead that person. And I think that's certainly part of what we're talking about here. And again, kind of alluding, comparing it to like a football team, like I've always prided, our teams on being very cohesive. And I know some teams will have like the offensive players are kind of over there and the defensive players are kind of over there and there's very little interaction. And I know that's a model for coaching a football team. But in my experience, I've always tried to integrate. And I wanted everybody to realize that, we were all, it was all about what the outcome was. And, I would always right off the bat, like if there was ever any thing I heard about, well, the offense didn't do this or defense didn't do that, I made a point right away to address it because that's not how we operate. And I think creating an environment within your group where people aren't territorial, but they're in it for the good of the group. And when you're in it for the good of the group, that involves sacrifice. Yeah. And they're willing to do that. But I think that those processes can only really happen, or I think the first part of that is that relationship piece that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. I think that's probably kind of the gist of so much of this, right? Is that personal connection. And I think in business, sometimes we think about sort of this separation between personal and work and, don't want to get too tangled up in people's lives. But I mean, like you said, John, when we know something about them, then we could give them a little grace. If things are going sideways for them, we could lend support either emotionally or physically by taking something off their plates, right? We could create let them know that we care about them by knowing a little more about what's going on with them, right? And that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. And I think, and again, that's hard to do at times, but I think in terms of, even going back to the whole healthy teams concept we kind of started off with,
Yeah.
is having those sorts of relationships, I think, that are genuine. Now, again, I'm not talking about like maybe some icebreaker that, is kind of very surfacey. I'm talking about taking the time to catch someone and also remember, that's the one big thing for me is when someone you communicate with someone or have an interaction with them, if the next time you see them, you remember something or you ask them something, I mean, that shows you're on a much deeper level. It's not, you're not just giving them the old, "Hey champ," kind of high five down the hall thing. So I think, really and I guess I'll finish by saying that I think, like in football, we're all, coming up with new plays or defenses or schemes, but getting that relationship piece, taking the time to invest in that is almost as important.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And okay. So, John, let's talk now a little bit more about the team you're on versus the team you lead. And when I'm doing sessions, I'll ask the group, and it's a little bit of a trick question, but I'll ask them, what do you think is more important, the team you're on or the team you lead? The team you represent, like your department, or the executive team that you're a part of? And the answer is it's the team that you are on, right? The executive team. And why that's so important is because if the executive team, the leadership team, the head coaching staff, right, if they are all on the same page, then when you're working with your departments, there's no confusion about agendas of who's doing what. There's complete clarity. And that's something that we talk about a lot in the table group materials, is about creating clarity for your people, right? When there's clarity, people can act with confidence. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that from your perspective, John, the team you're on versus the team you lead, maybe some of your experience.
Right. No, and I think that I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, in that when it comes to coaching staffs, for example, I mean, high school football team, there's going to be 40 to 50 guys and maybe 5 to 8 coaches, and everybody's sort of working independently, but we're really, all going in the same direction. So I think as far as the team you're on as a coaching staff, yes, maybe you coach the offensive line and maybe you over here coach the linebackers, and those are two kind of totally different things, but we all have to understand that when we go in front of the team, we're all on the same group. And I know one of the things that that's why we will meet as a coaching staff every Sunday morning, and some about variety of personnel, strategies, whatever. And we're not always in agreement, okay, but the key is we work it through so that when we leave that room and we hit the group on Monday, that we're all messaging the same. And I think that step is important to, and I think the process by which we did it kind of allowed for each person within, that's leading a group to all kind of converse and work through the process. But then once we left, everybody was on the same page.
Yeah. And I think being able to avoid those working silos and groups being critical of other groups. Mm-hmm. And sales, well, we made our sales, it was the ops people that didn't follow through is the reason why we're failing. No, we all have the responsibility and to be able to help out in other areas and be able to contribute across the whole board, understanding what the big goals are.
And I think, really, fostering a scenario, an environment, I guess I would say, like there's an old expression that I, heard a coach once say, if you tolerate it, you encourage it. And one of the things for me over my coaching career that I've really put a premium on is, we don't, if a receiver drops a pass, the quarterback doesn't ever say, "Oh man, if he caught it, we would have been fine." I squelched that from day one. And the messaging for me is that's not what we do. And because if I tolerate a player doing that, then I know that down the line, that's going to become a little more, it's going to become more widespread. And so you kind of having that as maybe a principle on the team that you're on here, that we're going to all message together, and we're not really going to allow that environment for those sorts of things that you mentioned, Ralph, to happen. I think that's important to have that understood right away.
Yeah. Hey, John, have you had a situation of like where you were just saying like quarterback throws a pass, kid drops it, and just even the body language of the quarterback? Have you had
Oh,
a
yeah.
situation like, well, I didn't say anything, but you can tell from his body language
Right.
what he's saying?
Oh, for sure. And that's something that, I mean, I've told quarterbacks, I've had talented players that were wanting to be a quarterback, and they would do just that. And I took them aside and said, here's the thing, there's no way you will ever play quarterback for us if you can't control your body language. Because the messaging can't be, I did my job, he didn't do his. Because believe me, there's going to be a day where you, as a quarterback, throw a bad pass, and you want the receiver to be looking back doing one of these. So I think, that's got to be something that I think as you cultivate leaders within your organization, in my case, a team, and, in business or managerial group, you want to, target people that understand that they're really able to get the idea that, we are not divisive. Yes, someone dropped the ball, in the business world or on a team, but we're not going to shine a spotlight on that. We're all going to pick it up and find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Okay. Moving on to our next topic here, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to physically build trust, because it's great to talk about trust and it's important to have trust. Everybody wants trust, but it's something else now to really get to the work of doing it. So what are some of the things, John, that you've done to start to build trust with a team or your coaching staff?
Well, I think number one of the top first things I would say is be a leader by example. I think that's critical for your workers to, in my case, your players to trust you, is if you are leading by example first. If you want them to practice early and be prepared, then you have to do that. So I think that piece is sort of pivotal. The other one, Ralph, you sort of alluded to it earlier. I think a huge part of trust in my experience is having very clear expectations. And I think if you have clear expectations of in my case, what to wear to practice, what we're gonna wear when we go on the bus to go to the other school. What do I expect, our offensive line in the huddle? And I think if you're very clear, if you have very clear expectations of what the standards are, then it enables you to, not enforce, but to hold the members to those standards. Because I think one of the things where people really lose trust in an organization or team is when they feel like there's double standards and, well, that head coach said to do this and this guy over here is not doing it, and no one's really holding them accountable. I think having clear expectations allows you to kind of set a standard, and then when everybody sees that everybody's being held to the standard, I think you get tremendous buy-in. And that's where the players, in my case, trust you as a coach, because they know that it's not how good or bad of a player you are. It's everybody's held to the same standard. And that really, I think, is a key ingredient.
Yeah. 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 The support of the team is as or more important than your individual contribution within the work part, right? The team is that important.
Yes.
That's where we hold the highest. And in a couple sessions, we'll talk about accountability and we'll dig into this quite a bit. So, but yeah, that is it, right? And I think what you're talking about is really about creating the culture, right? I mean, we talk a lot about culture, but it is about the behaviors that you will accept and how clear are you on those behaviors, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
if you're not clear, then people are going to kind of just do whatever, right? So if it's not clear, then it's on you as the leader.
For sure. And I would actually, add a real thing that happened. When I went to Silverton, Oregon in 2010, the team there had been in last place, and kind of struggling, and things got kind of turned around pretty quickly, and I was fortunate for that. But in my third year there, we won a league championship for the first time in I think 15 or 20 years. And we were going into the playoffs, and we had won our first playoff game. Now we're playing our second round playoff game, and we were practicing. And one of our best players, probably our best player, in a drill, kind of went outside the scope of the drill and really hit this kid pretty hard and knocked him to the ground. And I immediately jumped in, and again, last thing I wanted to be doing when we're having our big playoff game in 2 days was kind of get on this kid. But I did. And I said, that's not tolerated. You know better than that. I mean, I stopped the drill, and he kind of got startled, and he apologized. But then at the end of practice, as we're leaving the field, another kid on our team, that's another sort of backup player, came up to me and said, "Hey coach, I really want to thank you for doing that." And I think he said something along the lines of yeah, you got everybody's back, not just the best player, so I think when your group feels like you have clear standards, and you're willing to it doesn't really matter who does it, you're going to sort of ensure that we keep to the standards. I think people feel that they're in a place where they can not only trust each other, but they can trust you as the leader to do right by whoever, anyone in the order of operations there.
Yeah. And I think that's really the sort of the foundation of healthy, right? Is having that kind of environment. And an example I would give in the business world is salespeople. And salespeople, great salespeople, probably a lot of people who experience this, can be difficult. And there's only so much that you can tolerate from a high performing salesperson that doesn't follow the rules. And at some point, as a leader, you have to establish what is the end point for what you're willing to tolerate from even a high performing, high producing salesperson. And I've had to let them salespeople go who were high producers, but were horrible culture people. They would cut corners. They would make work for other people. They wouldn't finish their paperwork. They wouldn't collect everything they needed to. So just the downstream effect of them and them getting their paycheck just created just havoc for so many other people. So, I think that there's such great examples of really being able to hone in on saying, you know what, doesn't matter how good you are, from a star player to a salesperson or whoever, this is what I'm going to tolerate, and that's it, regardless. So, yeah, really, really fun discussion. So I want to share with you all a trust exercise you can do with your team in the workplace that is really very, very simple to do and very easy to do. And it's just a 3 questions. So if you're in a meeting, and this is easier to do if you have a facilitator, but can certainly be done by the manager of a group. And you're going to get together, get in the right headspace where you can have a little breathing room, a little discussion. An offsite meeting is great, but a meeting where you've got a little more time to spend together. And really what you're trying to do is what John said earlier about really kind of getting to know each other and trying to understand each other a little bit deeper. And sometimes it works. People are a little more or less reluctant to share. And this is a nice way to kind of get people started. So I would ask the leader to start, and we do this routinely with groups that we do sessions with. And we ask the leader to start. And I usually prep the leader ahead of time and ask him or her to be a little bit vulnerable and to share a little bit on this to set the stage for the rest of the group. But just answer these 3 simple questions. Where did you grow up? How many siblings did you have? And where were you in the birth order? And what was a childhood challenging situation, positive or negative, that you lived through that helped formulate who you are today? So the way this would go is, I would say I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in the 70s. So if you can picture the Wonder Years, That was my childhood, just roaming free in the neighborhood from sun up to sundown. Great childhood. I was the youngest of three children. I was the only boy, and I was a oops baby. So I had a lot of slack. I had two older sisters, and I heard a lot of "It's okay, Ralphie." I got a lot of permission I was very spoiled, so very privileged that way. And a situation from my life would be that I met my wife Elizabeth when we were 15, and have only dated one person, and we've been married for 36 years. And for us, that it has worked, and but it's certainly been a huge formation of who I am today. So, John, do you want to share? You want to share your three?
Sure. I mean, I grew up in Santa Fe, California, San Francisco Bay Area. Much like Ralph, funny you mentioned the Wonder Years. That's my favorite show of all time because it always resonates strong. I'm the oldest of four boys, and I think that was, as I look back on things in terms of that, really sort of led me into my really career of what I've done all these years as a coach. I think because I was always in a little bit of a leadership position with the four of us. We all get along great even to this day. But in terms of challenging, I mean, I had a really blessed childhood, and I think one of the realities for me being the oldest, and my mom was a teacher and my dad worked for the park department, was that kind of making ends meet. I mean, we always had enough, and we were always did just fine. But there was always sort of an awareness by me of have a paper route, work in the summer, and which I think ultimately was a great thing. But just kind of understanding that your role in the pecking order of I'm not going to get everything because there's these others below me that are going to need it too. And I think that was a real kind of formative thing for me throughout my childhood was this kind of awareness. It was never really spoken by anybody, but just kind of understanding that, I'm gonna need to be unselfish and kind of, understand that there's others that are going to be needing things too.
Yeah, yeah. So you can see just from this simple share, John and myself a little bit better, and maybe where our perspectives are. And John being the oldest and having that responsibility of being the oldest, and me being the youngest, and not having that plays out, right? So just that little bit, we get to know each other better, which is really what this is all about. And it was a very easy share. And I've had it with groups where people will get quite vulnerable, which is it's a beautiful moment in this with the group, and where people will get teary and will really share, and people will say that that's just the most moving and the most enriching part of the entire day could just be this little share right here. So I would encourage you all to use this and to do it in a way that would be helpful for building trust with your team. All right, so vulnerability-based trust. So there's two basic trusts that we have outlined, and one is predictive trust. And predictive trust is, six things you expect at work. You expect that you're going to get your paycheck deposited on time. You expect, your manager's going to do your review. You expect those are just things that you would predict, right? Vulnerability-based trust is really that deeper level of trust. It was what John was talking about earlier. It's when we get to the deeper level and a little bit about me, and I can be vulnerable with you because we've got a good relationship. And where I can go is I can be comfortable with saying, I don't know. I did it wrong. I need help. I'm underwater here. I don't know what to do, right? And being able to be observant enough to be able to hear when other people are using that type of language to be helpful and supportive. And that's what vulnerability-based trust is all about. And that's that higher level. That's that smart organization kind of trust. So, John, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I would say, first of all, yes, that, I think as a coach, as a football coach, I know, my players are all, I've been really, again, blessed there, are always doing their absolute best. And so, I will tell them, hey, I made a bad call. I should have called a different play. I put you guys in a bad spot. I should have punted, and in our defense, sorry guys, I put you in this bad predicament. That's on me. And I think you have to be willing to do that for a variety of reasons. One is, I think that, again, it builds the fact that you're human too, and you're vulnerable. But it also, I think we've all probably interacted over the course of our lives with someone that will never admit they're wrong. And then that can really undermine, this whole idea of trust. If, no matter what happens, that person's not going to take responsibility. But I think that being willing to kind of put yourself out there, the players or your employees will appreciate that. But then the next step in what Ralph alluded to is in actually asking for help. And when I came to Mountainside High School, we opened a new public high school in Beaverton, Oregon. We became successful pretty quickly. And we had some really great, seasons early on. Well, a couple years ago, we started the season 0-3, and it was a newer group. We lost a lot of our better players. And so after that third loss, and I spoke about the Saturday morning piece, we would lift weights and then we watched film. Well, rather than, watching the film, I got them into our lecture hall, and I basically said, what are we going to do? Because in high school football, a lot of times if teams are 0-3, that can lead to a kind of disastrous season. And so I said, we need, as a group, to come up with a formula to turn the tide. And so what I did is I called on, hey, Kevin, what do you think? Yeah, now, what do you think? I think I framed it like, give us a positive thing that's coming out of this 0-3, and give us something that tangible we can do better. And I went around, bounced around the room, and I wrote them on the board, and we kind of, it really, I honestly wasn't completely planning on doing that. But as we started it really became very, very healthy, and it gave the players, I think, empowered them. It gave them a voice. And so I made a list of kind of what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And really from that point forward in our season, I would almost daily draw on, hey, we said we're going to do this. And we said we're going to finish every drill. We got to do it. You said it, I said it, let's, and that became sort of a little bit of a rallying cry. And, our team went on to win our next game, and then we won our next game. And then pretty soon we'd run like 5 or 6 games in a row, and the season completely turned around. But, I think the fact that, I didn't do it because I was playing Jedi mind tricks. I did it because I wanted their help, and let's get this right, And so I think that, that kind of scenario can play out, but I think it has to be in a environment where they know me, I know them, they trust me, and I think they know that I'm willing to like say something like that. They know that
Yeah.
I'm willing to take responsibility, and I think that allows that to happen.
Yeah. That's such a great story, because that is just like everything linked together of what is right about that, right? Is that because the other part of that could come from that. The other side of this is blame, right? When someone's not willing to take responsibility and be vulnerable, then if it's not my fault, then I've got to blame somebody, right? Rather than taking responsibility. And so you being able to be vulnerable and say, I don't have the answers, guys. Let's talk about this together. I mean, that showed a lot of courage on your part to be able to be that vulnerable in front of all these young men who are looking for you to lead. But sometimes leadership isn't always having the answer.
Right.
Leadership can be being vulnerable and asking for help, and knowing when to let the team know that you don't know. And that's okay. And that's really the point of this. But I mean, that's such a great story too, that pulls this whole notion of vulnerability-based trust together, and an outstanding outcome because of it.
Yeah. And I think that, And again, it really, again, it kind of brings us full circle. I mean, could we have had a healthy discussion like that if I didn't have true, genuine relations with our players? No.
No.
If they didn't know me and I didn't know all about them, and they didn't
Yeah.
know that I had their back, and they didn't know that I trusted their opinion. I mean, they knew I trusted them, and so I think that it really was kind of a culmination, like this vulnerability based trust. I think is really can become a culmination of all these building blocks, kind of leading up to that point. And I think when you get to this point, I think you have a chance again to do great things as a group, but also problem solve as a group. And when people feel empowered, that they can be part of the solution, I think that's a big deal, because so many people work in environments where all they do is complain, and they don't feel like, they're not going to listen to me anyway. But and I'm not saying every day, but I'm saying if you regularly, when necessary, are willing to show this vulnerability based trust, I think that it can really empower your team and again continue to build this trust that we've been speaking of.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I think that, and I think the interesting thing is too, is that you earn the right to be vulnerable because of the things you said, because you've put the time in. You put the
Mhm.
time in to get to know each other and to learn about each other. And because you did that, because yeah, you can't walk in if you hadn't talked to these kids all year and then all of a sudden you bring them in a room. And that happens in work too, right? Like all of a sudden somebody you haven't seen comes in that you don't even know, and all of a sudden they start asking like, well, why are the numbers the way they are? Why aren't we hitting our sales? We need ideas. We need ideas. No one's coming up with anything, right? And
Right.
there's no way. So yeah, you definitely earn the right to be vulnerable and to be able to help people that are being vulnerable. So all right, awesome. So let's finish up with some recommendations, because we want to give people something to walk away with, and some takeaways that they can go with. So John, why don't you go first?
Well, again, I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I think that in terms of recommendations, I guess I would start with leading by example. I think in being a leader, not just in words but by example, can be step one. You can start that tomorrow in terms of building trust. Number two, clear expectations, and really being clear about what's expected and all the different avenues and outlets in your with your team. And number three, really the relationship piece. I know we've said this already, but I
Yeah,
think those are things that, there's not a 6 month plan for that. There's, that can be done. Those things can be implemented immediately in terms of building these relationships and stopping by someone's office, or, catching someone in the hallway and having a sincere conversation. So I think these are some things, because there's no magic potion for this, but it's built over time. But I think the sooner you start with even just those basics, I think the faster you'll see trust, really develop within your group.
yeah, yeah. And one of the things that we talk about within the table group is the idea that sometimes we think about the healthy side being sort of the squishy side, kind of the kumbaya sort of side. But really, there is very clearly a return on investment when you are willing to invest some personal time in your people, because of the things we've talked about today. It is worth, if you are just a numbers person who is just about the bottom line, your people will be more productive if you invest in them personally and help them understand the business and help them along the way, but really understand where they're coming from and their history. So there is very clear return on investment for the effort, no matter what your point of view is on this. So my recommendation too would be to do that exercise that I gave you. And it could start depends on where you are in the continuum, right? So you could start right where John talked about, with just simple conversations of rapport building and getting to know your people, and then lead into something bigger and do something with your group, with your team, where you're sharing and everybody's sharing, and then you can get to know each other on a little deeper level. So then when you do have maybe those little conflicts or squeamishes here and there, you know more about where that person's coming from. And if somebody like me, who's just the spoiled kid on the third part of the family, that you understand a little bit more. So that leads us into what we want to talk about next. And we want to talk about, we're going to continue up the pyramid here. And next time we're going to talk about conflict. And conflict being really what is just the search for truth. And we've got to be able to have good, honest conflict in order to get to the truth. If people are polite or scared or intimidated, you'll never get the great answer. So we're going to talk about what good conflict looks like, why it's important, and how to get to it. And we'll give you some exercises, some examples around conflict. So now that you've built trust in your group, now you've got the ability to get to some conflict and to get to some really good answers. And that's what we're trying to get to. So any closing thoughts, John?
Yeah, I would just to say again that I hope some of this resonates. And as Ralph sort of alerted to, mentioned earlier, I mean, my goal at this point in my career is really to be a resource and help people, both in the sports world, but also if these are things that you find helpful, because I've been very fortunate and I feel like these are things that really do work. And so thanks again. I really appreciate the time with you and look forward to continuing the series. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, John. It's so fun chatting with you and hearing the stories and flushing through this information together. So you see our emails are down there. If you want to email either one of us, we're happy to answer questions or talk about potentially coming on site to your place of business or schools or whatever to be able to do some more work with you. We're happy to talk about that too. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.